Good afternoon, everyone. Peace and salam upon you all. My name is Sama Saeed, and I'm co-director here at Arts and Homelessness International. Reminder to myself that I must speak slowly to the translators, and this reminder goes to all our panelists. Welcome to this important session, and thank you so much for some of you who stayed here for the co-created guidelines on photographic representation. This panel is follow-up from that on photographic representation in the arts and homelessness, and it gives me great honor to be sharing this conversation, and I'm truly delighted to introduce such an inspiring and diverse panel of speakers who are each making significant contribution to their respective fields. Today we will explore the power of photography as a medium for social change and how it can challenge perceptions, help support marginalized voices, and enhance our understanding of what homelessness is today. We'll also look at the impact of participant-led life, some examples of some projects, and how art-based practice make all of that happen. Photography has long been a tool for storytelling, as Mark will touch on later, and when placed in the hands of those with lived experience, it becomes a powerful catalyst for empowerment, agency, and advocacy. We are privileged here to have with us Ray Trumpeter from Streetwise Opera, whose over a decade's work in digital storytelling, photography, and journalism covered conflicts and human rights around the world, bridged the gap between the arts and social action. Ollie Bream, who's online with us from People of the Streets, a researcher and a facilitator specializing in cross-sector, participatory and digital approaches to the future of development. His expertise brings innovative approaches to creative representation. We also have Dr. Owen Clayton here with us, a scholar from the University of Lincoln, offering academic insight in the history of representing homelessness in literature and photography. And Anthony Rivera, a friend of ours in our network of Arts and Homelessness International. He's a distinguished photographer and a writer who's dedicated his practice to collaborative storytelling with marginalized communities. His practice is built on dialogue, trust, participation, and, as you've seen earlier, co-creation. Additionally, we are joined by the lovely Benji Spear, who is an associate alumni of Arts and Homelessness International. He's a multidisciplinary artist who will share personal insight and experiences of engaging with photography project and working closely with Anthony. And also Mark Harworth, all the way from the United States of America, from Invisible People, a global advocate who uses digital storytelling to challenge stigma surrounding homelessness. He's pioneering force in narrative change, revolutionizing how we perceive and address homelessness, and myself, Samra Saeed, who's going to host this conversation with you today. And together with these speakers, they're all going to guide us through discussion on representation, ethics, the roles of art in addressing homelessness. You've touched on it earlier today about the co-creation of the guided photographic representation, what it means to look through consent, context, and the progress that goes with all of that. So what I offer and what I invite you to do, and most importantly, I encourage you all to engage with our panelists, ask questions, stay curious, take some notes, journal or doodle, or even do some art while you're in this session. And without further ado, let's start with our panelists. Give them a round of applause.
Hey.
Thank you. First, I invite Dr. Owen Clayton, to some introduction and remarks about your practice.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know who's controlling the slide. Oh, there we go. It's already been done. Brilliant. Thank you. So I just wanted to talk about 3 images. They said I could have 2 images or 2 slides, so I cheated and had 2 slides with 3 images, as you'll see in a second. I wanted to talk about 3 images just really quickly. The first one is from Jack London, the author Jack London's narrative, The People of the Abyss, which is in London, is in the city of London. He was an American, but he came over and pretended to be an out-of-work sailor. So it's kind of an interesting book, but he also took photographs. And this image I wanted to show because it's an image, and the title, I don't know if you can see, it says, Nowhere May One Escape the Sight of Abject Poverty. And you've got 2 sort of well-to-do ladies coming out of the Empire Theatre on Leicester Square, and you've got a guy who's kind of identified in the text as a sort of homeless person, or tramp is the sort of more common term of the day. And I don't know whether you can tell because the image is probably fairly small, but if you look closely enough, you can actually see that the man, the so-called tramp, actually wasn't in the original image, has actually been literally cut and pasted into that image from another photograph. So it's a literal cut and paste, not a metaphor in the sort of Photoshop era, but literally cutting and pasting. And I think it's kind of interesting from a perspective of history of photography and, you know, photographic manipulations, much older than we think. By this is no means the earliest example anyway, but it's also, I think, an interesting example of, you know, of a tradition of using photography historically in relation to homelessness, which doesn't really care about the person, I suppose, and it's just using the person as a prop. Or was it an art materials, as was stated earlier. And don't get me wrong, I do like Jack London as a writer, but I think there's certainly some ethical questions, even though I think it's also photographically interesting, this image. If we go to the next slide, there are two other images, and this actually takes us a little bit further back in time. So the one on the left-hand side is from a British journalist called Henry Mayhew, who in the mid-19th century had a serial publication called London Labour and the London Poor, which came out every week. He was a journalist, and he did interviews with people who were in poverty, quite a lot of whom were what we would call homeless. And there were often images that were engravings based on daguerreotypes, which was one of the earliest photographic forms. And this one is called The Street Seller of Nutmeg Graters. And it's a profoundly... a person with sort of profound disabilities, I guess we might say today, who's kind of basically not got the use of his lower legs below his knee. And what's kind of significant about this is two things. One, it highlights the way in which for many years, since the invention of photography, homelessness or people even in just extreme poverty are being used as types, and maybe we talk about types later. They're kind of used for what they represent, not for them as individuals. What's particularly interesting about this image is that William Alloway actually wrote to Mayhew, and Mayhew published what Alloway wrote about things about his life in the serial publication London Labour and the London Poor, to the point that Alloway actually became famous in London as one of the first people who'd ever been kind of represented in photography, because this is the very, very earliest days, particularly among the working class, or people who were homeless. And so he actually started to get money. He was able to buy himself a cart and a horse, start up a fruit stall on this basis. I think it's a really interesting example, because for Mayhew and Richard Beard, who took the original daguerreotype, you know, he's quite a passive character, and yet Alloway actually uses the image himself to kind of improve his own situation. The second image is from Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives from 1890. It's an image called The Tramp. And there's quite a sort of famous story about this image, that the man in the photograph agrees that he's going to be paid a quarter to have this image taken of him by Riis, and then he realises that Riis is quite interested in the sort of picturesque look that he has when he has his pipe. So he takes this pipe out of his mouth, and Riis says, "What are you doing? I need your pipe in your mouth." And he says, "Oh, well, that'll be another quarter." And so Riis ends up paying him double so that he puts the quarter back in his mouth. And the way that Riis tells it in the book is he's kind of really scathing about this guy. And he's like, "Oh, he's gone on strike," and he's really, you know, scathing about this guy as somebody who's lazy. But I think we can kind of read back against the grain and against Riis's own intentions to see, yet again, this is somebody who, despite all of the power of photography to sort of be a force for surveillance and oppression and the forces of mainstream power, there are also ways in which it can be used for agency, even if it sometimes has to sort of seep up through the cracks. So yeah, I'm sure that was over 3 minutes. I'll stop.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, and brings me to Ray.
Okay, I've actually just started a timer, so hopefully. I look at this subject through 3 different lenses. The first one is my experience as a journalist and photojournalist. I've covered conflicts and human rights and people with experience of trauma in Afghanistan, Palestine, Israel, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia. And I understand that there are big stories that society needs to tell. I understand that one of those stories is homelessness. And I also understand that in the very visual world that we live in, news agencies and news publications are going to need images. So I am all for them being able to tell their stories, as long as hopefully they're going to be questioning governments about what they're doing or what they're not doing about homelessness. And I'm also the opposite of naive. I'm very cynical about any of those stories ending homelessness. But we still have to be reminded that is a thing. The second lens through which I view all of this is my own experience of homelessness. Now, I was fortunate to never be on the streets, but I spent 3 years sleeping in sofas, sleeping at friends' houses. And I got to see how horrible, the word I use is dehumanizing. And I say that with a lot of respect. I mean, people with lived experience, we are still human, but there is a certain dehumanizing, a certain objectification of people with lived experience of homelessness. And if back then someone had knocked on my friend's house and said, "Oh, you got a homeless guy here. Can I come in and take his picture?" Like if I was some sort of exhibit in a zoo, I would have been really offended for several reasons. The first one is, why does this person choose to immortalize me at my lowest? Why is this photo how I'm going to be remembered forever? And third, let's say that yes, let's say that you're a journalist and you're writing a story about the impact of homelessness, not on the streets. And I know, as a journalist, I know that story isn't going to change the world. So how much, if we have to balance between that story and the dignity of an individual, I'm always going to go for the dignity of the individual. And the third, and I don't want to use the word final because people evolve, right? But the third lens through which I view all of this is my work at Streetwise Opera. Streetwise, can we look at the other picture too? Thanks. Streetwise is a charity founded by the most amazing Matt Peacock that works with people with lived experience of homelessness through music, through creativity, and we always try to phrase it in the least patronizing way. We work with them to enable them to find, on their own terms, inspiration and empowerment. They inspire themselves, they empower themselves, but they do it because they're working, doing this, or it could be some other thing. But I've been there 8 years, and it works, and it is amazing. And we do a lot of photography as part of that. And if you go on the Streetwise Opera website, you will not find a single photo of someone on the streets looking miserable, because part of our mission is to say, hey, society, not everyone who is homeless looks the same, has the same background, and has nothing to give to the world. I remember when I was homeless, I used to feel like a sofa that needs to be thrown out because someone bought the new one, but the council hasn't gone to pick it up yet. So that's how I felt, how that unwanted and that in the way. So my job at Streetwise is for people to go on the website and find images of human beings smiling, experiencing joy, experiencing pride, reinventing their lives, and demonstrating that those of us with lived experience of homelessness can indeed, and it's easy to say, but think about it, we can indeed make the world more beautiful, which I believe is a revolutionary concept, because the idea that most people associate with homelessness is not beauty. But I do believe it. I do believe that we make the world more beautiful. We have a project on the streets, and people come and they see people singing, and it's a beautiful thing. So last thing that I'll say about this is that lens through which I view homelessness is, and photography is basically, despite how difficult it is, despite the fact that maybe we won't end homelessness, these pictures, and I hate using this word, rehumanize or correct that dehumanization and really inspire and empower people. So as difficult as it is, as many guidelines as we might need, absolutely photography can play a positive role. That's all for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we've got online, thank you. I'll come back to all the points that you have raised in a bit in our conversation. But if I can just bring in Ollie online with us to introduce himself and his work.
Hello there, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hello, Ollie.
Hi. I can't fully see all of you, but yeah, very nice to be here with you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Hello. Yeah, I've only just actually been able to hear the last speaker. I didn't actually catch your name, I'm so sorry, but yeah, a really wonderful testament, I think, to some of the reasons that the organisation that I'm here representing actually exists. I thought I'd use this time to briefly contextualise that and explain a bit about the work we do. I work for an organisation called POTS, that's P-O-T-S, and the P stands for lots of different things. We call it power on the streets, perspective on the streets, policy on the streets, people on the streets. Effectively, we started in 2017, and we initially started as a charity designed to kind of help support logistics in the distribution of resources for people experiencing homelessness. So understanding where is there a shortage of a certain good, and making sure that we can get that to where it's needed, and trying to map those areas. And as we got into that work about a year, and we started realising there was a big sort of hole in the sector, that whilst a lot of amazing charities are doing a lot of amazing frontline work, really urgent frontline work to deliver for people's immediate material needs, some of those less immediate, less material needs were being kind of neglected, and that wasn't really to discredit the sector as a whole, but just to recognise that the pressures it's under meant that some of those things were being relegated to sort of afterthoughts or secondary concerns. And those immaterial needs will be things like the fundamental needs that we all have that aren't, food and shelter immediately. They need to be listened to, they need to be understood, they need to have visibility and take up a place in your culture, in your community, that is yours and rightfully yours, that you belong in. And we realised that no matter how many tins of tomatoes or tampons that we could effectively distribute around the country, that was not going to meet those needs. And so since then we've been working to use photography and arts-based methods. We deliver courses around the country. We've done some international work, but we're increasingly focused in the UK. We deliver courses in photography that can be anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of months, working with people experiencing homelessness, and sometimes they're key workers or support workers from organisations that we partner with as well. And then we kind of commission them basically to produce portfolios of work that explore certain themes, and those themes will be always kind of surfaced through collaborative work. Sometimes we'll touch on so our last project in Manchester, which is actually 2022, we've gone into a little bit of a pause to redesign the organisation. Also funding difficulties, which will probably be familiar to a lot of the charities in the sector, especially now, or in the room perhaps now. Those themes, might be things like recovery, loneliness. We've had addiction in 2022 as well. Certain themes that the group themselves are invited to sort of reflect on and identify, and then on that basis we say, okay, let's work with loneliness and recovery, and we commission 30 photos on that basis, and then we work with the participants, with the photographers, to curate what we call disruptive and public exhibitions. So we go into supermarkets, train stations. Our last flagship exhibition was in Manchester Cathedral, and we try and get hundreds and sometimes even thousands of people to come and spectate. And we try and design spaces that are that are designed to sort of interrupt your average citizen in their daily routine, and consider what is very visible and a growing crisis, a visible problem across the UK, and consider it through new eyes, basically. That work that formed the basis of our sort of a model, and more recently we've really tried to explore how we can use the content that is produced by the photographers to begin influencing policy. And in that we're really trying to participate.
I think he froze. Wait a couple of seconds. Oh, all right, Ollie. If you can't hear us, we cannot hear you. So I'm just going to bring in these. We'll come back to you. I'll make sure you finish that sentence. But yeah, interesting conversation there around your line of work. But Mark, how you doing?
I am fair, partly cloudy, filled with jet lag.
Stretch.
Yeah.
Tell us more about you and Invisible People.
My name's Mark. I had a great job in the television industry. I ended up homeless on Hollywood Boulevard. I rebuilt my life back to a 3-bedroom house and a cushy marketing job and a new car, success on the horizon. And in 2008, the economy crashed and I lost everything again except my sobriety. So I want to tell you that my motivation was to make the world a better place, but I'd be lying. I just needed a reason to get up in the morning. It was a very dark time. I was crashing back into homelessness and I couldn't get a job. Rent was monstrous, and I grabbed the camera and I went out and started interviewing homeless people. And the thing that was magic, because I almost didn't do it, because I'm a television producer by trade, is video should be edited. It needs to have music and graphics and look pretty, because I want to win an Emmy, right? That's what video is, but I couldn't edit. I couldn't edit the video because I had lost my computers and everything. So I just uploaded it, just raw, unedited, and that was the magic. That is what attracted people. The raw, authentic, unfiltered homelessness. And why I brought that up, and I've changed a couple times, in our conversations, and I hope we go into this, about needs-based images. And I get it. When I interview a homeless person who tell some of the most horrible experiences you could ever imagine, I stop at the end and I ask them to give me a smile. And I make them laugh because I want to take that happy photo that I use as a, but that's not reality. Homelessness sucks. Homelessness is horrible. So if we just only show smiley homeless people, we're not showing authentic homelessness. So what I'm saying is there's balance. We have to have balance. We recently did a documentary on Helsinki. Helsinki, Finland. Jet lag. And everybody had gone there. BBC, CNN, and they're doing all this great stuff about housing first, housing first. I'm a high school dropout. I go there and it's something different, but why I'm picking this is we usually show the success to homelessness as a well-behaved homeless person in a very nice looking apartment. But that's not necessarily the truth. We do a section, I call the messy room. It's the most authentic look at housing first. The kid was still on heroin. We established why he's using drugs, which would break your heart. But it's the most messiest room, tore up. And we asked the case manager, the employees, what about this messy room? What about this messy room? And they said, you know what? Some people don't get better. Some people take months to get better. But they're no longer homeless. And this is their best chance of getting better. And we have to extend unconditional love no matter what kind of condition they are in. So I wanted to tell that story because as storytellers of homelessness, the human experience is beautiful, gorgeous, filled with love, filled with hate, filled with negativity, filled with pain, filled of horrors that we can't imagine. So if we're just showing smiling homeless people, that's not reality. If we just show negative on homelessness, that's not reality. We have to have balance, and the people are going to connect to authentic stories.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.
So I think we're back now. So I wanted to say, just to finish, that we are now increasingly, in the last couple of projects we've done, trying to use the content that's created by the photographers we work with to try and influence policy, basically. And in the process, what we're trying to do is take part in a broader shift. I think one of the speakers earlier, whose name I didn't catch again, spoke about this kind of awkward term, but kind of a useful term in some ways, rehumanising what are ultimately often dehumanising policy systems and support services that exist. and the last speaker just spoke about Housing First. We work a lot with Housing First, so our last big project was with Manchester City Council and a group there who are part of the UK-wide pilot on Housing First, and really trying to contribute to the evidence base so that the UK government can finally renew and extend the pilot to make it more of a national norm, as is the case in other countries. And we recognise that, you know, whilst there's a lot of facts and figures and hard data out there, really trying to surface insights from the sort of nitty-gritty of people's lives can be quite challenging. Not only is it quite challenging to do that and quite useful to have that information, but it's also really compelling, whether that's in Parliament or in the public square. So trying to get these photos and stories and the messages they contain and the nuances and the emotions they contain from very much the horse's mouth, so to speak, without any researcher or photojournalist or journalist or politician trying to mediate that reality, and just kind of this pure expression. We hope that if we can organise that content and form platforms with it, we can hopefully, quite a compelling way, try and push those systems and services to shift in broader ways, like towards Housing First, that are more humanising, more human-centred, and ultimately, as we know from the data, more effective. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we do. Very excited to be here today and take part in the discussion. I hope that provides a bit of context.
And they said to me, "You'll love it. Photographers love it. You'll make amazing pictures." And I felt really uncomfortable, and I said, "No thanks. I think I'd prefer to see what the people I met were taking pictures of." And I was being a bit of a smart aleck. And then I found myself in a position 6 months later where I was doing some consultation for Kodak on their single-use cameras. And I was able to get a really large amount of disposable cameras and processing vouchers. And I went back to Crisis, and they were at that time about to open their very first activity centre called Crisis Skylight in Spitalfields. And so I proposed to go along to the next Crisis at Christmas and invite people to come along to a photography workshop, which I then facilitated every Friday afternoon. And over the past 20 years, I've worked with thousands of individuals and groups of people around the country in different cities and towns on long-term projects, inviting them to speak with me about their experiences and the things they're interested in. And I do that through inviting people to take cameras away or digital sound recorders, or to learn how to use professional equipment, as is the case here, where I'm working with Sahai on a project that was created in Birmingham, where I was embedded in Cypher Fireside. Cypher Fireside is the main support service for single adult homeless people in Birmingham, and I spent the first year working in the kitchen. I didn't do anything photography or creative at all. I just focused on making and serving meals and getting to know both the staff of the service and the people that were there to receive services. And that was a really fantastic way for me to consult with people about the creative activities that I wanted to facilitate, and when should I do it, who should I speak to, and how should I go about it. And then I moved into a kind of practical making sort of phase, and then the pandemic happened, and I had to sort of pivot and work with people remotely, and again put photography aside and just call people up and see how they were doing, get food to them, get supplies to them, and just generally continue that sort of relationship until we could start working together in person. Could we go to the next slide? This is an exhibition of work made with people experiencing homelessness in Coventry that was shown in the public realm with a group of people who have experienced homelessness, and accompanying the exhibition, which Benji took part in, we also created a community newspaper that was distributed freely as well, which was sequenced and rudimentarily designed by participants, and then that was handed over to a professional designer.
And you still can buy them online, by the way.
Yes, I generally give them out free. I've only got two here.
No, don't.
And
they're too good to not give them out free.
can we have a quick look at the next picture? This is me working with a group of participants at Cypher Fireside to co-create this publication here, which came out in October last year, which consists of photographs made by participants and the portraits. And the portraits, I should say, which I've been making in different cities and towns around the country over the last 20 years, I call assisted self-portraits. in order to kind of give nod to the methodology, which is I work with people over repeated sessions to teach them how to use professional medium format camera equipment tethered to a laptop, so we can work out how to use the equipment to make a portrait that the person feels comfortable with in places that have significance to them. And just one last look to see what's next. Oh, okay. So this is work. I've been embedded in a team of focused care practitioners in Oldham, in Manchester, Greater Manchester, who work for an organisation called the Shared Health Foundation. And so I've been developing relationships with families and inviting them to co-create portraits with me, family portraits, to record conversations with them about their experience of homelessness. And then if you go to the next picture, we staged the first exhibition of that work in the House of Commons in Westminster. And it was, well, I should also say that the Shared Health Foundation, with whom I was embedded within, a co-secretariat to an APPG, along with another charity called Just Life, and the APPG is around temporary accommodation. And so through the run of the exhibition, there were campaigners lodged in the exhibition who would who have this incredible kind of Rolodexes of parliamentary staff in their brains, and they would like pounce on people and get them to come and engage with the work and the issues at large as well. So the way that I work is very sort of embedded. It's very it's about sharing the information that I have with the participants. It's about inviting participants to co-create, and it's about really thinking about the use value of the work and sort of really sort of trying to position it as a tool for the organisations and policymakers and grassroots campaigners that I work alongside in order to amplify the work that they're doing to influence and change the political situation.
Thank you
so
very much. Thank you. Just mindful of time.
Of course.
Benji Spear, how you doing?
God, where do I start? I'm Benji.
I'll play the roses.
It's the wrong section, the other one.
Oh, that's
all
right.
right.
Next one.
Second slide, the other one. That's the second one, the other one's...
How about now?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so I'm Benji, have lived experience of homelessness on and off for about 12 years or more, with and without my mum, in all sorts of precarious situations around not just mental health, but poor services run by homeless charities, not AHI because they're amazing. So I met Anthony when he was Crisis Coventry, and he had run the agency, and we had disposable cameras, and we went around the city taking pictures and also doing self-portraits, with me having a really bad hair day and nearly getting run over going across the motorway, the ring road. So it was just like, also my partner was involved, and he really enjoyed it because he could interact with more people, which he really enjoyed. But then when my mum had passed away because of hospital negligence, what happened was, like, I had put down my camera. My mum used to take loads of photos. We've got loads. I've got loads that she took in the house. The house full of mold and different issues and problems. So it was a really hard time. So I hadn't picked up a camera for a long time before Anthony came. And it was just really hard to separate the two of my mum's passing and being able to pick up a camera again. But then Anthony sort of pulled it out, and I managed to start taking photos again. So I do a lot of different things, but one of the photos I took was there was a coached load of people who went down to Weston-super-Mare, and it was in a couple of years ago, and then there was a everyone had some experience of homelessness, and we decided to go down and save the sea monster, which it was a huge, like, £1 million structure. And then there was a call out again to come down, and then nobody replied except me. And then I went down, and then I started to take pictures, and then I was made advisor of the company after about 3 weeks of knowing the person. And then after that, we worked. Oh my God, we worked with McLaren in 2 summers ago on a £1.5 million video that lasted about 3 minutes. And it's so hard to organise them because they're not great at understanding small prompts. So I had to organise a whole team and make sure that they had photoed the places properly and had set up the art rooms properly. So it was really difficult. But from then on, I've been taking. We recently did a project with Gavin Turk, and it was just. He's an artist, and it was just it's taken off. So I currently work with about 16 companies in counting, and I created a team of 20. So there's loads of different things happening, and yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's plenty. That's all the speakers, everyone. Thank you so much. So yeah, that's where do we start from? I suppose during the conversation we have touched on why we still need to take more photos. I think in each of your presentation we kind of answered that. But I guess I'm curious, Ray, how can we ensure, once we've established the use of the images and the photos, and we understand our intention of why we take them, how can we ensure space for images that prioritize ethics, human decency and positivity is still enhanced within that intention?
I mean, I don't think we can ensure anything, because there's 8 billion people in the world, and they will do what they're going to do. I believe a lot in sharing ethical guidelines. I believe in having lots of conversations. I believe that photography can serve multiple purposes. For example, Mark was talking about showing the nitty-gritty side of homelessness. I don't, because first I believe that a lot of people already know what that looks like. I remember having a massive argument with a BBC producer because they were doing a story about us, and they insisted on going and taking one of our participants to the doorstep where he would sleep when he was street homeless to film him, because they needed, I'm sorry, I'm going to curse, but I have to. They needed a fucking establishing shot of someone on the streets, or else people wouldn't understand that this was a story about homelessness. I threatened to cancel the project, and eventually they didn't do that. But I believe in showing a different side of homelessness and reminding people that not everyone who's experienced homelessness has one background. They don't all have the same experience of either substance abuse or mental illness. And I believe that use of photography helps people communicate and connect with people with lived experience of homelessness. And again, I hate using that word, rehumanize them in their perception. So as long as we can do that, I think we're doing our jobs.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And that brings me to you, Mark, in terms of that, what you were interrogating earlier about balance. I guess you heard Ray's decision on
Well, I started thinking about that, and I don't know if it's jet lag or anything else. And I prefaced it by saying, yes, we try to take the happy photos too, right? We want to represent that, and then I started questioning, is that reality? And I think it depends. We had a session earlier about context and informed consent and content and all that. And I think when you put it all together, right, I'm really huge on ethics, right? Nobody gets hurt. We did in Los Angeles, there's an area in Venice Beach, California, that just has the most angry, nasty residents. I mean, they will lie. They are some of the most evil, nasty people I have ever come across, and they're using.
Did the fire reach them?
So they lie. They will lie. For example, if there's ever a fire anywhere, they immediately start sharing that it was a homeless encampment. Los Angeles Fire Department has even come out and said, no, it wasn't. But they make it so loud, it starts getting picked up in the media. They share false narratives. So we did a documentary targeted to them. And we had this conversation. How do we talk about mental illness and how do we talk about addiction? And we went back and forth. Do we avoid it? Because it's real. If we avoid it, they'll look at us and say, oh, that's not real. So we hit it head on. We hit the topic of mental illness and drug addiction as authentically as the homeless person spoke to us. But throughout, we messaged hope. We messaged housing as a solution. So I think we need to be very real about social crises, wherever we are, but you have to do it in a frame of hope. Because people see it, they see that. They see this whatever crisis, and by saying it's something else, and it depends. I agree with the decisions he made. So I'm a little different as a documentarian. I think documentarians should capture life and not interfere. So I would have immediately said, no way, because they've asked me too. Could you go walk in again? No, if you didn't get it the first time, I'm not going to stage. That's Hollywood, right? So you made the right decision. I think those are ethics that I live by. But it's a important conversation. I don't think there's easy answers, and I do think there's balance. When we're talking about needs-based image, what you want organizations to stop using it, I can tell you as a fundraiser, you're asking them to cut 30-40% of their revenue. Needs-based images work to raise money, right? So how are you going to say, and there's like this philosophical, because that's money that they use to help people, right?
Brilliant.
And I'm not saying I know the answers. I don't think anyone. It's good to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
But in the reality of the real world, there's sometimes when I use a needs-based image because I want that emotion to be transmitted. But I'm very conscious of how I use it. One thing came up to me that I haven't, and I'll shut up after this. I know a charity here that sends a photographer to New York to capture needs-based images because they don't want to capture people here in London because they might know them, right? But in somebody in New York, because it looks like winter here, right? Everybody's dressed the same and they can capture those needy images. And not have to worry about consent. So they send them over for a couple of weeks.
I have so much to say on that, really so much to say on that. But before I come back to you, just on that note, just our hearts and minds to everyone who's been impacted by the fire. Just it's important to note that. But that brings me to you, Doctor, about the history of photographic representation. Where are we right now, and what our lesson has been learned based on the conversation you just heard?
Just call me Owen, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. I mean, I think it's really interesting and really important to have this debate. I think with regard to history, I'm not going to say a huge amount, except I think like there's been amazing photographs taken throughout history, but they haven't been amazing ethically, would be what I would say. There's been some absolutely incredible images aesthetically that have been taken with really terrible ethics behind them, and I wouldn't get behind that in order to make the image. That would be my position, I suppose. With regard to where we are now, I think like there's certainly an argument that gets made around fundraising. Certain types of images are good for fundraising. I don't know if the research on that is 100% solid, because I've certainly read people who have made that argument, but I don't know whether organisations are really committed to trying something different. I guess I would also say that like there's a difference to me between an organisation fundraising for its own existence and helping the problem of homelessness, I suppose. So when an organisation fundraises, it's not necessarily always going to use the money that it raises for the best of reasons either. I mean, there are big homeless charities in the UK, for example, have a terrible record in terms of the rights of their workers, and have spent money on marketing for union busting, for example. That's not a great use of fundraising, I would argue. So I think this is really important to have this debate. I think I totally agree about the need for balance. I guess I think that the balance at the moment is very much skewed in one direction. So I think we could probably have more images that show things in the round. I don't think there's a reason why images have to avoid the negatives whilst at the same time avoiding showing somebody as being completely passive. I think that for me that's the bigger issue, not showing something negative happening so much as showing somebody who is an object. I think that for me that's a problem. You take an image of somebody, it turns them into an object in one sense. So what can be done in order to remind the viewer, the audience, that person isn't an object, that person is a person?
Thank you so much, Owen. Thank you very much. And that brings me to you, Ollie, if you can hear us. Just following from what Owen said in terms of the person, and I think I'm really interested and curious, and I think everyone here as well, about your organisation policy with media consent and photography, and how much of the participants understanding of that when they are signing to participate in your programming and projects and services, and have you had examples of where people withdraw their consent after they had taken part?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for us the question of consent is something we've had to seek a lot of advice on and really make sure that we're at each project not trying to sort of parachute in with sort of policies that we've scripted from a sort of context independent place, but really be listening to all the stakeholders on the ground in each specific city, recognising that if we're not, we're based in Manchester, but the partners that we might be partnering with on a given project, they need to have the sovereignty to be able to tell us what principles matter most to them, and then accordingly we'll sort of flex what we do. I think one interesting case where we had to withdraw consent, someone whose name I won't mention, but in some work we did in 2021, I think it was, whose portfolio they produced was incredibly moving and touched on a lot of really intense themes, and without going into any detail, it involved sexual assault, and the photos documented some of the sites that had happened in for them, and this was really exploring their process of recovery and the value that the Housing First programme had given them in facilitating that recovery, and they wanted to explore the pictures of that old home and their new home. And what we tend to do is when the portfolio is produced, we'll sit down with the photographer and solicit their consent to record an interview and explain that they can withdraw that consent whenever, and that they sort of agree to that in the presence of someone that they trust as well. So we try and involve make sure that accountability is is distributed as well. And as they began to actually explain the stories, it became really, really distressing for them. And we make sure that we've got some degree of training in this kind of stuff, in safeguarding, and we take that very seriously. But ultimately, we're not psychiatrists, and we're not qualified to be in that kind of position where we're effectively offering, listening ear to someone recounting something incredibly traumatic. And in that instance, it was pretty clear that the only decision was to take was to obviously to stop the interview, to delete all the content that had been recorded, and then to start from scratch and reappraising how we actually presented that content. And it turned out that they actually wanted, after on reflection, present a much more, I wouldn't say positive, but a much more, let's say, hopeful narrative than the one that they were initially called to talk through. So I think this taps into what the other speakers have said so far, is you know, traditionally, when we have photographic representation of people experiencing permanent homelessness, and a great deal other many issues besides, the decision of how to present, when to present, is typically that of the journalist, or the photojournalist, of, you know, perhaps the researcher in some context. But changing who speaks, changing who's holding the camera, who's behind the lens, and who's in front of it, is an ethical basis in itself there. So yeah, I think in a single word, listening to those participants and understanding on what terms they're comfortable to share, what they're comfortable to share, when they're comfortable to share it, and if they're not comfortable to share, then it doesn't get shared. But yeah, it's a really complicated one. We adapt what we do every time. Really, just listening to the insights from the people we trust on the ground.
Thank you so much. And I think if you have a link on your website of your media policy, please feel free to put it in the chat. That brings me to you, Anthony, in terms of the project that you worked on, the assisted self-portraits. How much of that, in terms of the participants and their involvement about their consent and the ethics that's going through that process, and is anyone has actually been impacted in any way, harmful way since that project, or has it been a completely positive experience from start to finish?
So each project has that I've created. I've worked in cities around the UK, such as boroughs all across London, in Brighton, Colchester, Manchester, Coventry, Birmingham. Each project has its own name. So, for instance, Construct was in Birmingham, Agency was in Coventry. The assisted self-portraits is a method that I used throughout each of those projects to co-create the portraits of participants. So it's it is a project in its own right, but it's also a way of working. When the first exhibition of the work that I've been making with people experiencing homelessness took place, it was on the London Underground in 12 stations in zones 1 and 2 as part of the TfL's public art programme. And we had an assisted self-portrait along with photographs that they had created in each station. And when I was preparing preparing the exhibition, I took in prototypes of the posters. I invited participants to come and see the locations. I did as much as I thought I could possibly do to prepare them for the exhibition as it would be seen by the public. And 12 participants took part. One participant consented, said yes. The exhibition went up. They felt uncomfortable about it. They asked for their images to come down, so we took them down.
Within the billboard?
Sorry?
Did that go on the billboard?
Yeah. It was, their work was in Liverpool Street and Stratford Station, and so we took them down. And then a couple of weeks later, the exhibition had begun to receive some positive attention, and she changed her mind and wanted to be part of it again. And we didn't have the resources to be able to reproduce the posters and billboards. But what that taught me was that consent is a dialogue. It's not a form, and it's an ongoing conversation. And I think one of the other things that I learned from that experience was to always have some contingency to do the whole show again if I need to. I think there's maybe been like only 2 or 3 instances in the last 20 years where people have changed their minds. Most recently that happened with a participant from a project called Assembly, which was made in Brighton, and they got in contact and asked for the image to no longer be used. That work was made between 2012 and 2014. At that time, I think I certainly wasn't. Many people weren't using things like Instagram. People weren't really using online photo sharing platforms in the way that we are now. And so the kind of conversation that I had around consent with that person at the time didn't take those sorts of forms of technology into account because I didn't know they existed yet. And so I did as much as I possibly could to scrape back and ask people to take that image down. And then they changed their mind and said I could use their first name with the image. I've not used that photograph since. But I guess what I'm trying to sort of indicate here is that consent is a dialogue. People always have the right to be in touch with me and to change their mind. you know, when having that conversation around consent now, I try to stress all of the different potential contexts the work could be seen in, but also the unknown in terms of what might come technologically in the future. I can't account for.
Can I
Thank you so
follow
much.
on from that?
Yeah, I was going to come to you, Benji, and just ask you what has your experience been, and
So I only learned really like consent from Anthony from like taking photos, because I was going through trauma at the time, but I was coming out of it. And one of the photos was where my mum slept, and it was kind of somewhere where I felt close to, that she'd always be there like a spirit. And it was just a really hard time. But when Anthony asked me, is it okay to take the photo here, I was like, yeah, that's fine. I was surprised he'd asked me. But looking back, it's a lot of people who are going through emotional trauma, you need to be aware to ask them. So one of my other friends who's a photographer, and he about a year ago, he was taking photos on the street, and there was somebody who was homeless. And I said to him, are you sure you should be taking that photo? And he replied back to me like, because it's a public space, it's all right. But to me, I felt like it's not all right, because he's going through something right now, and he really doesn't need, even though there were so many people, he doesn't need a camera highlighting what he's going through emotionally, because I saw myself in him as like a person, and it's about being empathetic as a human being, and also knowing that you can't just run roughshod over somebody's lives all the time. It's just, it's not on, and let's boot those people out.
thank you so much, Benji. I'm just mindful of time, and I really want to touch on the workshop that you had earlier. And that's the question is Owen to Ray and Anthony, or anyone who attended, about what, I know you've touched on intention, on the methods, on the consent, the context, and the use that we've also touched on a conversation around here. But what's your hope about this co-created guidelines, and when can we expect, the report or the document to share with our audience?
Can I say one thing about consent? What we do,
Please do.
and I'll make this really short. What we do is, as a news organization, each homeless person retains the right to their content. And it's raw, unedited. I mean, I can't cut it out of context. I give them a card. You can easily find me online. And if they ever want it removed, I so respect what you're doing. If you're like doing, posters and you got to pull them down, huge respect. And no questions asked. Out of 1,300, maybe 4 people over the years, I've had much more people thank me but we will do that. If we're doing a documentary, or we did a VR film with Facebook, Meta, that was with homeless people, we pay an actor's day rate plus $100. So non-union day rate is $200, we make it $300. Usually an actor works 10 hours, they're gonna work 3 hours. They're definitely getting more. But there's certain situations where I have to have the rights. We've worked with brands and different things. And if that's the case, then we compensate them more than fairly for their time. And that's how we deal with consent and informed consent. And like you said, the person out there on the street, just because they're out on the street, that doesn't, you have to have some empathy.
That is so interesting. I think what I found really difficult is, even most recently from my own example, is that an organization that I volunteer for, we had like a big massive photo shoot, and the face of that photo shoot consented, understood what that project was, everything. But when we were in live, it went so wild beyond our imagination, and the person started getting phone calls from families far and near, that the person becomes really overly overwhelmed and wanted to remove and withdraw consent. And while we had some control about where it went and how we could remove it immediately and reassure them, it was so difficult with the use of so many digital, and people have shared it, and hashtag, you could find it, and the person to become so like really nervous and on the edge of actually working with us again. But they also understood it wasn't, you know, we've done what we could within our control. I think that's where the line is. What can be within our control and what is not within our control. And that's something I think I'd like to leave everyone. But yeah, thank you so much, Mark. But back into the conversation about the guideline and that we co-created earlier. I'm just interested for those the audience members online who have not part of the conversation. What have you guys? What has been the learning? What stood out for you most about this guideline?
I think it was a really rich conversation, but the very sort of beginning of a discussion, and I think many of you included your contact details on the postcards, and what we'll do is we'll get together and we'll reread all of the suggestions and questions and topics that were put forward, and then we'll contact people to say to give you a bit of an update as to where we're at with it. I think our sort of initial thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, was to potentially draw up some kind of short document, guidelines, manifesto, set of questions, something that might have use value, framed as questions, because as creative practitioners we all know that art and creativity is not made by following a set of rules, but rather kind of thinking and reflecting on your own creative practice. I think that's what comes to my mind. What do you think, Ray? Is there anything else you would add?
If this is something we can share with photo editors at newspapers and photographers and photography teachers, I think it's going to be a very positive thing. We don't know what they're going to do with it, but it's getting a conversation started.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, and I think that we don't need more of a certain type of image. It feels to me, and I think Ray, I think your story with the BBC where they said people won't understand that the story's about homelessness. I think that really belittles the intelligence of people, right? I really think it does. I think you can tell a story about homelessness that doesn't need those cliches, stereotypes that that put people in boxes that say that this is the only thing that defines that person, even if that was maybe a moment in their life, right? And they've had a whole other life before that, and they have a whole other life after it. So if we can get them to sort of do a bit more self-reflection around, can we see something a bit more holistically? That's the intention behind what we're going to be doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panelists. Please join me to thank Owen, Mark, Ray, Anthony, Benji, and online Ollie. Thank you so much from me and our whole team from Arts and Homelessness International. Sorry we ran out of time to ask questions, but we will be around, so please, and for those online, please put your question in the chat and we will hopefully respond back to them later on. But thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
I realized why the really bad.
Thank you so much.